conservative, constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
And welcome, everybody, to another amazing day right here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. For those of you who can see, I'm clearly not in my normal studio-type area. I'm actually joined here by Representative Steve Doan, Republican representative out of the 69th District. That's Northern Kentucky area. What exact counties?
Yeah, so I've got Kenton County primarily and then Boone County as well. And I represent Erlanger, Ellesmere, Independence, 2 voters in Edgewood, Crestview Hills, and then Florence over in Boone.
Okay, great. Fantastic. So there you go. And I wanted to go through this past session. I said when session ended, I'd have a deeper discussion on it. And so I thought it'd be useful to bring somebody who's a little more familiar with what's going on, not even necessarily behind closed doors, but the flow of things to better discuss. So let's just start off with this. Overall, Doan, scale A to F, what do you rate this session?
You know, I'd probably give the session maybe a B. You know, I mean, I don't think it was a perfect session. I don't think we really advanced a lot of the liberty legislation, a lot of the things that we could have. We did some good stuff. We cut your taxes, your income taxes. But I think we could have done better. So I'm going to give it a B.
Okay. What do you think we missed out on that made it not an A?
Yeah, like our DEI bill, for example. We had a chance to really put forward a strong, good DEI bill. I know Jennifer Decker had worked really hard on that bill, and then we end up passing something that, it was milquetoast. It was weak. It didn't have any real enforcement or teeth to it. They put this thing in there where if the Attorney General wants to force it, you have to do a writ of mandamus, which is kind of like, even if you're a lawyer, you're like, I got to go back to law school and figure out what a writ of mandamus was. So just kind of a weak.
What is a writ of mandamus?
So writ of mandamus is where basically a superior court or a superior power comes in and tells an inferior governmental power, you must do this. Mm-hmm. And so, it would be like if a judge isn't following law, then you can go to a superior court and say, hey, the judge isn't following the law, tell the judge to follow the law. So, for example, University of Kentucky could completely violate the provisions of House Bill 4 and continue to do whatever it wants with respect to DEI. And the only remedy that we have as citizens is to petition the Attorney General to ask him to go and to sue UK and to say, hey, stop doing that.
So individuals have no private action.
No private
no
causes of action,
things.
Nothing like that. Right.
And anybody who's familiar with how government's held to account most of the time, it's citizens suing.
It's trial attorneys holding government accountable on behalf of the citizens.
Yeah, I mean, that's the main thing. I mean, you sit there and you rely on the Attorney General. I know how you feel about Russell Coleman. I would say he's not doing anything damaging, but, my personal opinion is he's kind of leaving a lot of opportunities on the table. A lot of, we take a look at the Amendment 2 fight around school choice this past year. And you had tons of school just even after he put out a advisory opinion saying, hey, look, using school resources to campaign for or against this amendment is violating the law. Schools then went ahead and did it anyways.
Right.
And what happened to these schools? What happened to the people who break the law? I mean, we see that nationally too. A lot of the frustration for us citizens is that nothing happens to these government officials that continually break the law. And I think it deals a lot with the fact our attorney generals won't act on things.
Yeah, I think he's doing the job. I don't know. He's not wading into the political waters as much. If we'll ask him for an opinion or something, we'll usually get it just from certain issues or topics. But yeah, and I'd maybe in his second term, maybe he's looking at re-election, and then he'll maybe wade more into political waters. But
so you had the writ of mandamus issue on the DEI bill dealing with DEI in colleges and universities, and this is something I posted about too. Is that when we look at who they're putting as employees in these DEI departments, and then they say, "Well, we're disbanding it. We're getting rid of this." The employees don't go away. the job titles just seem to change. They get put into new things. I mean, UK has now specifically, I think they hit it over there in the Department of Agriculture, a Department of community engagement and something else. I'd have to look exactly what it's called, but they moved it over to like their College of Agriculture, renamed it, and now all the same people are working there. A lot of the same people are working there, and it's hard to hit it when we're talking about terms like DEI if they just change the name but they keep the meaning the same. And this really became obvious to me when we were talking about like CRT. Mm-hmm. And you go back and look at Matt Lockett's bill, BR 69, I forget what House bill it ended up being in 2020. One or two, when that was a big issue, and you look at his definition of CRT, and then you look at the definition of DEI, and they're both the same. And what did the legislature end up defining DEI as when they ended up going through this?
What they did is they included things that were like related to bias or related to indoctrination, which I think is just kind of a hard thing to prove, whether or not a professor or a university or a university group is trying to indoctrinate somebody. I think that's probably an overly broad term.
Especially, too, when you're handing that power off to Attorney General. I mean, we hope.
And what if they're indoctrinating
it'd always be
the right
a Republican, right? But what happens when, it ends up being... we see this with the conversion therapy bills, where it's like, well, you can convert their gender one direction.
Right.
But you can't convert it back. And so it's kind of the same thing where it's like, well, what if, not so much indoctrinating the right way, but what if, we've established as our norm and our colleges and universities is pretty liberal, pretty left-leaning. Mm-hmm. And now if you come in and you're right of what their norm is, which probably would still make you a liberal by any means of the definition, right. Well, now they can claim you're, indoctrinating and everything else and come after you for.
And part of the big DEI fight, it's all about money, is really what it's about. I'm on the post-secondary education committee. I pay a lot of attention to what the universities are doing, what the presidents are saying when nobody's recording them or watching them. And so, NKU's president came to like a Covington Business Council meeting, and she got up and kind of the DEI stuff, the questions came at her, and I liked her responses. She said, we're focused on the kids in our backyard. We're focused on what's going on here in Northern Kentucky, and we're not worried about recruiting kids from Chicago or from wherever else to come in here to kind of meet these funding metrics is what she was hitting around. And then about a week later, she introduces her first big program, and it was about like promoting women in colleges. So just a DEI program. And like one of the things I always talk to,
it's crazy too when you look at the breakdown of enrollment.
And that's one of the things I always talk to these lobbyists is they'll come to me, the lobbyists for the universities, they'll come to me and they'll have this like spreadsheet of like, these are all the populations we're serving. And I'm like, you're about 60% women and you're like 35% men, or I don't know what the other numbers are in there, but it's like this 60-40 breakdown, and I'm kind of like, are you really like looking to equally serve underrepresented populations, or are you just trying to continue your enrollment and pump up and get the folks that are going to pay to go in there?
When you see it's crazy to me when I hear women don't equal treatment. And you hear something like a university talking about, well, we need to really make sure we're doing a big empowerment woman situation. You're 60% women. Like, they're fine. You got it. You fixed it. Yeah. You guys did it. You handled. We don't need to keep going with this. Well, so I'm a lawyer and I graduated from law school, and the majority of, I think my classmates were female. And so I have practiced family law, and you look around in Northern Kentucky among the 3 counties at the family court judges, and all of them but one, so it's 6 family court judges, 1's a male. And it's like, yeah, women have achieved a great deal of success in higher education and in higher society. So, it's just kind of one of those things. Is DEI actually serving the populations or achieving the mission that it's set out to, or is it about money? And I think it's more about money. Well, coming up after this, we will go ahead and dig into some of where you think the biggest misses are overall. And we'll be back with that here in just a second. And you're back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show, sitting down with Representative Doan, House District 69. So looking back at this past session, what do you think was some of our missed opportunities? So you rated a B. You know, I would say overall, we didn't get hurt too much. So I guess we're used to getting hurt.
Yeah.
But when I look at our missed opportunities, bills that actually had hearings and passed a house or two or what have you, I just see tons of missed opportunities. So it's harder for me to give it a B when I'm like, look, we had the opportunity to do all these things. What are some of the missed opportunities you think you're...
Yeah, I would say, well, first off, House Bill 806, which was my bill on backyard chickens, which is not a it's like, well, the Republicans don't have a solution for the egg crisis. Like, yeah, we do. We have, let people grow their own food or have their own food. Not that that's going to be the end-all be-all.
Not hand out a Kentucky specific, you have to have an egg handler's license?
Maybe.
No, you do.
You do.
Like, if you're selling...
Oh, yeah.
Just, like, it's so weird. If you're selling eggs, so, like, I can cook you eggs. I can buy eggs and cook you eggs under the same license as I buy anything else and cook it for you as a restaurant. But I guess if I'm selling eggs, you would think just supermarkets in general have just one license. But no. If you're doing eggs specifically, there's a special egg handler's license. And I think it was put in place in order to stop some of these roadside egg stands and things like that where people, because if you look at, okay, what is something, you got an acre of land, what is something you could do on that acre and sell? And eggs comes to mind. You put 20 chickens out there, you produce about a carton of eggs or so a day, and you're not going to eat a carton or so of eggs a day. Right. You could sell the other, 4 or 5 cartons. So I think that plays into it, but you had your backyard chicken bill.
Yeah, and that was one that was really interesting. I put it on social media, and it probably got more likes, views, retweets than anything I've ever done before. Half of them were, this is the greatest bill ever, and then they would tag their politician in it all around the nation. And then the other half of the responses were like, how dare government even need this, or how dare government even be in my backyard regulating what I can and can't do on my property. So it's like when that's the response, like, that's a missed opportunity. We had a real chance to do what people wanted.
Well, and I think that's one of those, I bring this up sometimes on the show where I talk about, when we talk about new laws, power exists with either the government or the people. And until the government passes a new law on something, you have the ability to do it. Like take backyard chickens. Yeah. Until the government restricts backyard chickens, you don't need a license or anything to have backyard chickens, right?
Yeah.
And you could just have them if you wanted, and then they had to pass a law, and that takes power away from you, because they were talking about, you hear so often, local control. Let's talk about local government control or state control or federal control, or does that belong to judiciary? Does that belong, who gets this power? And it feels like the citizens are left out so often of that conversation. So that's your own bill that you had a lot of response to. What's a bill that you saw move a fair amount that you're surprised it didn't pass, or has a reason behind it that you think would be worth bringing attention to?
Yeah, I think Steve Rawlings' religious liberty bill, I thought that was an interesting one. I feel like we passed it out of the House when he was a House member. I remember voting for it in Judiciary, and this would have been the prior session. And then now Steve moved over to the Senate, and he was able to get his bill out of the Senate. But the same bill that we had passed out of the House of session prior, we can't pass out of the House the next session, despite the Senate giving it back to us. So I think that was probably a big missed opportunity for us.
Do you think, so looking at that situation there, the conspiracy theorist in me would say, well, they never meant for that bill to pass. All those times they passed it out of the House, there was a deal cut with the Senate, hey, just make sure this doesn't pass.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't even get a hearing. So when he was in the House passing it out, I think it did get a hearing in the Senate one year, and then it didn't make it to the floor. And then, as you said, this is passed the House twice. You don't even need deep hearings on it.
You probably had 6 different members, so it's not like the vote count is wildly different.
Right. And Yeah, you don't go back through, and it just leads to this conversation of, is this deals being struck? And I hear that often too, that, hey, they're making a deal to make sure this bill doesn't pass. Does that really go on?
I think so. One of the things that, with the departure of Damon Thayer, love him or hate him, he was kind of the one guy in Frankfort that was willing to take all the heat and kill a bill. And, the House, you got 100 members, you got 80 Republicans. So our leadership's like, yeah, we got to kind of feed everybody and make everybody happy and, pass stuff out of here. And then it would just go to the Senate to die. And Thayer would just kill stuff. And, he was kind of the stopgap. And I think with the change in leadership over in the Senate, the way they do their rules is a little more member driven. And so they kind of are able to get stuff through that they want and send it over. And so I think you saw more of that, is stuff getting through one chamber, going over to the other. And instead of having a kind of a stalwart there that'll kill stuff and take the heat, they kind of had to broker a little bit of those deals and see what could and couldn't go through.
So when we look at something like take the religious freedom bill, if I go to somebody like, let's take Nemus, he's the whip, right? So he's in charge of whipping up the votes, or go to somebody like Osborne and say, why wasn't this bill, this Rawlings bill, that has already passed your chamber twice, that now that he's over in the Senate, it's passed the Senate, this should be an easy, no debate bill. Why didn't it go through? What do you think they would say? What would be their excuse for it?
The answer always given, and it's not specific to any member of leadership, is, we just don't have time. Or we have a lot of, there's a list of priorities, and these are the big priorities, like next year in a budget year. It's going to be like, all we want to do is get a budget and we want to go home. And
right.
So that's kind of how it'll be, is we'll take up all of our time on a big priority and then not let the little easier things that we could just get through early on.
Now, it's harder, and I understand the good-natured of this, but it's harder to take the we don't have time thing serious. When you tune in, you watch the floor, and you see for 20 minutes, they're talking to this one, I guess he's a new House rep passing his first bill, about falconry. Mm-hmm. Did I say that right?
I have no idea what it is, but yeah,
training and whatever falcons. And I guess he's big into it, his dad's big into it or something, and he's passing a bill on something completely different, should be a quick, everybody votes yes on it. It was a non-important bill, essentially, and it should be done and out in 5 minutes, and they spend 20 minutes talking about that, and you see that all the time.
Yeah.
And it's hard to claim like, we don't have the time to have these discussions and debates, when it's like, well, one, that particular bill, take Rawlings, you've already had these discussions and debates. But two, you spent 20 minutes talking about, it doesn't matter. It literally doesn't matter to anybody else. And you're just wasting everybody's time.
It's hazing. They're hazing a new member is what they do. Anytime a freshman comes up to pass a bill, and generally within your first year leadership, or your first term, leadership will try to get you one bill on the House floor, through the floor. And yeah, they'll do the hazing thing. And it's not something that I participated in the past. You chuckle at it at times, but I'll get text messages on my phone from the folks at home watching. Like, what are you guys doing? You should be passing bills or doing the job and not playing games and telling jokes.
Well, and and I think the frustration comes from when you have a priority that or a bill that you want to see passed, and you're told we don't have the time, and then you see that kind of garbage. Yeah. If you weren't using the excuse we don't have the time, you could get away with doing those. But on the other hand, and you wonder too, because I got a text from this guy just a few days ago, and he's a big Second Amendment person, and he texted me about this House Bill 204. You were a co-sponsor of it, an act relating to concealed deadly weapons. And it deals with post-secondary facilities, government facilities, carrying a weapon. Real quick, do you know, could you summarize the bill? Yeah.
That's Savannah's bill that would allow college campus carry.
Yeah, it was that. So it was campus carry and those kinds of things was what it would allow. And so he sent it to me and said, hey, now that bill's been proposed, every year for?
Every year. She almost got it through my first term, my first year in, I know that we had caucused on it. She had gotten it through committee. It was pretty well primed to go, and then it just one of those things. It just disappears.
You wonder, in that bill, like, do the universities have that much pool up there where they're able to? Why do they have so much pool that they can kill those kinds of things, or even DEI? I mean, they killed the harsher DEI bills that we are seeing the past few years.
I think there's folks that in Frankfurt that have been around that helped to architect and construct some of the stuff, and they're members and maybe House or Senate, and so they kind of are like, well, hold on, I did this. It's not bad. It's not wrong, and so they kind of stay in there to hold. And although not explicitly protecting their back, I think they believe what they did in the past was the right thing to have done. But certainly, I mean, the lobbyists have tons of power.
Right.
I mean, every member gets the opportunity to buy UK basketball season tickets. And it's like, well, that's a nice little perk, That's the general population doesn't get that opportunity.
Right. Right. Well, and I mean and it's weird too. As long as you offer it to everybody, you're allowed to do it.
Yeah, that's the lobbying rules. Are no cup of coffee is the rule. So the lobbyists can't buy me anything. But if they buy the same cup of coffee for every member, they can buy unlimited coffee.
Right.
And that's kind of the scam of lobbying.
So, but he sent me over that bill and said, how do we get this passed? And I'm looking at the sponsors of it. Maddox, main sponsor. TJ Roberts, Callaway, yourself. And I mentioned to him, like, it's the sponsors are the problem. Sure. They don't want to give that win to the sponsors.
Sure.
And I'm just feedback. Is that pretty accurate as far as that goes? Or
well, so, related to Second Amendment issues, you had Aaron Reed. So Savannah every year had proposed lowering the concealed carry age from 21 to 18. Right. You're an adult. You can go serve in the military and carry a gun. Why can't you carry one at home? And so I think Senator Reed got that through the Senate. And again, that's one that came over in the House and just died. And it was, I believe, Savannah was supposed to be the one to carry that on the House floor. It had been her bill for all those years. And that's one where it hit a wall, something that the vast majority of Republican primary voters, the vast majority of Republicans probably support, and, goes nowhere.
Well, coming up after this, we'll dig into some of the bills that passed that you like. Don't have to be all negative. We'll have that after this short break. And you're back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So looking at what are some positive things that you saw that was passed this past session that you can look at and say, hey, look, that is something we were able to accomplish.
Yeah, I mean, look, we cut your income taxes, House Bill 1. That's a big deal. I'd had an amendment on it that would have done away with the system that we had of, like, are we allowed to cut your taxes? It would have just made it a straight cut.
And that doesn't really, I mean, I mentioned this on a show, and you correct me, I guess, if you disagree, though I don't think you would. It's kind of silly when the legislature passes a bill saying their plan for passing future bills, because they don't have to follow that. You make the laws. Right. You don't have to follow old laws when making new laws. Right. You just rewrite old laws.
Yeah, every law is subject to change in every legislative session.
Right. And it's interesting, too, on the cutting of the income tax. Changing gears here already from positive. Let's go a little bit negative. And whether you agree or disagree with the bill, Nemus had this. They had like a shell bill, right? It's a shell bill. And then last minute, he took like a 4-page bill that already passed, I think, the Senate too, and added on like 177 pages.
I thought it was more than that.
It might have been more, like 100 pages out of nowhere. And it did a few things. One, it changed it from cutting half a percentage point at a time to you can cut. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going deep down into it. I've talked about it on the show a lot. But the proportional percentages thing kind of changes where you don't have to cut half a percent. You can cut a 0.1%. Yeah. But it also gave this massive tax break and handout to a resort being built or trying to be built in Red River Gorge or something like that. What did you think about that bill and process? And the Kentucky, the Women's Voters League or League of Women's Voters, or whatever, pretty liberal group, but they do bring that up, that this shell bill and this thing is really killing a straightforward, honest process.
Yeah. So, that bill, the bill I think it passed the House. Maybe it got in the Senate, had an amendment on it or something and came back. And so they threw it back in committee. One of the things you'll learn if you really pay attention is the process is always what's important. And that's actually how things get done. And so I think part of that bill was probably a time-saving measure because, we don't have enough time to get to everything.
But why was it suddenly, though, this is now? So I didn't have this bill proposed already.
Well, they did. Part of it they did. So they threw threw like 14 bills, I think, onto one bill. And that's we'll take one vote instead of taking 14 votes. That saves us a day. So they did that as part of it. And I kind of, when the process isn't going through its normal routine or stages, and when you see a bill like that, I always know, all right, red flag. There's probably something bad in here. I had like maybe, I think it became like a 140-page bill, and so
and that you had what, a day's notice or two?
Oh, I think a couple hours.
Notice.
Yeah, anything big like that comes out of appropriations and revenue, they'll usually take the bill, put it in, they'll do a committee sub, and then within hours, they're bringing that from committee to the floor for a final vote. So nobody has a chance to throw amendments on there. When you have a big spending bill, it's like, well, hey, I want a new school. I'm going to make everybody vote on my new school. So they'll do that kind of stuff to go around the process a little bit and just to protect, unnecessary votes or amendments coming through on stuff. And so that's kind of, whenever something like that comes through, red flags go up. You don't have enough time to read it. Not a chance.
And it's crazy, too, when you think about, because you had the Tim Tebow amendment, which would have allowed, correct me if I'm wrong, but it allows homeschoolers to go to the public school sports teams of the districts they would normally go to. So if you normally would go to this high school, you can go try out for or play on their football team or their basketball team or what have you, even if you're homeschooled in that district. Correct? That's what the bill essentially does.
There was a Senate bill that I saw an opportunity here to put the Tim Tebow amendment on, put it on there. We took a vote. And one of the things that I got from, and a lot of Republicans just sat on the sidelines on this bill.
Yeah, there's tons of no votes on the bill.
Chose not to vote. And it's kind of like, and some of them after the fact said to me, you didn't give us enough notice or enough heads up on it. And I'm like, well, hold on. You voted on a bill that went from like 4 pages to 140 pages in the matter of a couple of hours. And my amendment had been sitting out for 3 days.
And it was like a page or two. It wasn't like...
Yeah, I think it was like maybe 2.5 pages, but that's because the amendments are longer.
Sure.
In the way they're drafted. But yeah.
Yeah, but it really wasn't much to read. And also, too, they can ask the sponsor questions on the floor.
Sure.
So you stand up there, you present the amendment, you all start reading through it, and then you can turn around. Did anybody ask you any questions about that amendment?
No. There were 2 members that spoke in opposition, both educators, who, and the educators are always going to be against that kind of stuff. Nobody... And I even opened up the floor. I said, if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to entertain those. And I explained what the bill did. It was very simple and straightforward. So, but no, nobody asked questions. There was no real debate on it other than that.
And so, it's hard to buy those excuses behind. It's just hard. It just seems disingenuous. It was, if anything, what you're saying is, look, I wasn't told how to vote on it.
Yeah, well, and there was no discussion on. It was kind of an interesting session. Usually we'll break and we'll discuss stuff, and I don't think we ever really did that a whole lot. It was just kind of an interesting session where we just, for whatever reason, we didn't have any, in caucus discussions about some of those things.
Well, and it seems like, going back to that big bill he put on, the incremental taxing, that's fine. I think it had some other thing in it that seemed
something out of
good.
Oldham County that's just caught fire.
This data center thing in Oldham County. Yeah, people have sent me a lot about it.
Yeah.
I got to read up on it. I don't live in Oldham County.
Same here.
As I see it, a lot of people are against it. I mean, I look at the data center that they did. I don't know what incentive they gave them. I know that the data center in Louisville that they incentivized to be built or what have you. I don't think it's the same one because I believe that was specifically Louisville. In the revenue bill, it was given a 50-year sales tax exemption from having to pay sales taxes on products and purchases they buy for 50 years. And it's like, and you look at something like a data center and you're like, where else are you getting revenue from it as a state anyways? Like, if property taxes maybe, but
maybe a tangible property tax or something like that.
Maybe, but you don't really have, what is it, like 5 jobs or something? You look at the solar energy projects that they tout and they'll put sometimes big money into and support. And I've talked about this recently just as I was looking at some of these different ones. And it's like they create like 3 jobs. Mm-hmm.
There was one like Thermo Fisher Dynamics came up maybe to Covington. And like Andy Bashir gave some big, like, whoa, we gave him like $2 million in tax credits and it's going to be this big, great thing. And it was like, it creates 16 jobs.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay. Does the juice, justify the squeeze there?
Yeah. I mean, well, and it's definitely picking and choosing winners and losers. There's that. But that was in there. He said the
data center thing was in there, and it's interesting because like I don't know anything about Oldham County. I don't talk to anybody.
It's weird
in Oldham.
because he has Oldham County.
Yeah.
You'd think with how upset people are about it, and it was his bill and his moves to get it done.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like within a couple of hours of that thing getting public, there were like websites up, and people were sending them to me. Like, look, there's already a website where the grassroots is organized. It's like, man, that's not somewhere you really want to be when your constituents are that upset about something you did. But
especially when it's a cross-party issue too.
Yeah,
because he's in a purpler seat.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what the breakdown is, but the general feel I've gotten is that it's a more moderate seat, you would call it. And then you have a cross, this is crossing party lines issues going on here and then you're the sponsor. It just seems there. But then you also had the giveaway to the Red River Gorge group in it that it was interesting. And, as we talk about economic policy that you see, we're coming up on a break, but when we come back, we'll talk about economic policy as we talk about the Senate's number 1 bill, Senate Bill 1. We'll have that after this short break. And you're back here with the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So in the last segment, we were talking about specifically this thrown together Frankenstein-esque big bill, went from something small to something huge, this shell bill, and process of it's ugly, but also about how there were some handouts in there, one of which to Red River Gorge, one of which to this data center there. And then also the big priority out of the Senate, which is surprising to me it's a priority because they must have just some really, really, really big donor that wanted this done because nobody's demanding this. I've seen nobody in your constituency demanding it. And that was to put together this Kentucky Film Office to bring more movie filming into Kentucky. And the reason why it's so surprising to me is that, well, one, we already give out $75 million a year in tax credits for movies and TV shows and plays and things. And so we're going to spend more money of that. 2, from a tactical standpoint, if you're a Republican, the movie industry is specifically pretty liberal.
It ain't friendly.
It ain't friendly to you as a Republican. And the workers in that area are typically not very friendly to Republicans. Not always. There's good people, both sides. But they're not typically friendly to Republicans. And so tactfully speaking, you're doing this. My point is that these are skilled jobs that we don't per se have the skilled labor for. Like I was talking to some people and they said, well, we have enough staff in Kentucky to do 3 feature-length movies a year. And it's like, okay, and so what are we doing now? Well, according to all the numbers I saw, it was around $300 million.
It's not a lot.
That's about 3 feature-length movies, though, And when they start talking, too, about their budgets, was that their production budget, their all-in budget, their marketing? Because that's the thing they talk about, too. They'll be like, oh, this will attract in these big-budget films.
Right.
Well, you spend $200 million as a film. How much of that was marketing? How much was production? How much ends up in Kentucky? So I look at it as you're importing people from out of state, best case scenario, to work temporary jobs. That you're giving them huge tax breaks, and you're not building an industry. It's like you give something to Toyota, right? That's a car manufacturer, and then you've got all the auxiliary businesses,
right. Logistics, and
all the things around it. You're building, and that will be here. They'll crank out a car today. They'll crank out a car in 3 weeks. You hope, right? The idea though is that the car manufacturing is a constant industry, but movies. You'll have one hiring group come in, shoot a movie, and then their next movie, there's no guarantee they'll come back to Kentucky. So I just say all that to say, what is the actual financial philosophy of the Republican caucus in the House? What is their economic philosophy here?
Yeah, well, it's always kind of been, the tax credit is a tax expenditure. So when the government collects money, it collects it on a broad base. And then however they spend money, that's a tax expenditure, right? I build a school, that's a tax expenditure. If I give you your money back, that's a tax expenditure. Or if I give you somebody else's money, that's a tax expenditure. And so that's what they're looking at with tax credits when you think about it. You can't think about it as like you're just giving somebody their money back. No, you're actually giving somebody else's money back, or you're just refunding.
Well, even if you're not collecting it, it's kind of like if 20 people are riding a bus, but 10 of them don't have to pay for the bus ticket. Well, the other 10 are actually having to shoulder the cost of the gas, the maintenance, the driver pay, and everything else on their tickets.
But it's not the regular guy; it's the big guy that's getting it back.
Right.
Yeah, the regular citizen doesn't get the tax credit; it goes to a corporation or somebody big like that. I was pretty lightly lobbied on Senate Bill 1. Usually when it's a priority bill, some lobbyist is being paid to go around and tell all the members how to vote and what to think. I never really heard from anybody on it. Maybe they just knew how I was going to vote just on principle, and they figured not to waste their time with me. But I did hear that, I guess, maybe Berea College or some college here in the state.
There's in Wilmore.
Was it Wilmore?
The Asbury University in Wilmore has a big film.
Yeah, like they do the Olympics. So all the students get to go every 4 years and go do all the filming of the Olympics. And that was kind of a like, hey, this is a homegrown thing, but I don't know that that's going to, really move the economic needle or, create Kentucky Hollywood or something like that. Then I would hear from other members, particularly Senate members who I kind of like where they stand on things, or I kind of agree with them sometimes on how they vote, or I'll listen to them at least. And they were all for it. And they all thought that it was going to that it was already there. It was a streamlining process. It wasn't necessarily new money. But I've always taken the position that if we're going to give tax credits, we should probably just eliminate the tax or whatever is there doing that. I think when I was on city council, there were 12 people.
Well, even if you talk about streamlining the process, and this is the other thing that doesn't make sense from the legislature, the process right now is, as I understand it, you file for this, you file it with the executive, they kind of put it forward, and then the legislature signs off on it in the government contract review committee. They sign off on the Kentucky Entertainment Incentive, and then there's an appeals process. If you're streamlining that process where now this one office is in charge of it, you're actually taking away a double check. Mm-hmm. I don't know exactly if that's what they did, but you're taking away a double check from the legislature, and a double check's needed. I mean, when you go back and look at the things we've given money to,
sure.
I mean, one, and I've made this argument, if you're going to be incentivizing a film to be made in Kentucky, if you think you're going to be building an industry, well, you better be bringing people to Kentucky. Like Secretariat, you can make an argument that definitely helped Kentucky's horse industry and so I get that, right? Mm-hmm. And you can make that argument. But when you're giving like $700,000 a season to 1,000-pound sisters,
sure.
I mean,
does that even help society?
Does that even help the view? You're literally giving a tax break to someone to make Kentucky look like a bunch of backwoods fat hillbillies,
Right.
you know. And not saying they're bad people or anything else, but I'm just saying that's what the image of the show they're selling.
Well, it's exploitation for sure.
Right. And then, or you look at, they gave, $500,000-$600,000 each to Sassy Maids 1, 2, and 3. And that makes you wonder, is that pornography?
Yeah, it sounds like it.
What are we giving money to here? Starts to become a big part of the question. And you can't, when it comes to something like, oh, well, we're not spending new money. You're creating an entire new government department.
Sure.
We know this is going to grow. That's how government works. This is going to grow. And already the legislature gave several $1 million, or at least $1 million or so, to building a soundstage in Louisville last year.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's new money.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't say that's not a part of it either. But going back to like the economic philosophy of this, because it seems like they just throw darts at a board. Is that what's going on? Are they just sitting in the back throwing darts at a board? Or is there some sort of economic philosophy that you believe the people pulling the strings, mainly the leadership of the House, actually believes in?
It's hard to say. I'm not involved. The rank and file is just not involved in those conversations. But we'll see pieces of it. When something comes through and something's different, you can kind of gather an idea. I think part of it is you have, and I don't know how different their philosophies are, but the two A&R chairs, Senator McDaniel and Representative Petrie, I don't know that they share the same long-term philosophy, and I'm not sure what it is. But there may be something there where you kind of have two cooks making the soup, and so one of them likes this ingredient, the other likes that ingredient, and by the time it gets through, there's a deal brokered that's come through, and that's kind of how our tax policy may look. Like, you think it might be a throwing stuff at a dartboard. There's probably a legitimate reason for what they're doing, but I never hear that as the rank and file.
Well, because you look, you see that we're spending more money every year. We're not spending less.
Right.
You see that we're giving handouts to a hodgepodge of industries. Obviously electric vehicles fell into play, getting well over $500,000 of just cash from taxpayers at this point, well over $500,000. And I guess in the mind of the leadership, that was just us building our auto industry more, though I would argue that was a new industry that you think, because it has four wheels and drives on the road, it's the auto industry, but it's
the way
not.
That the philosophy is always explained to me is that we are on this slow march to cutting income taxes to zero. And the reason we want to cut income taxes to zero is because it will attract new individuals, right? So if you lower the income taxes, then you will attract new individuals into the state. But it's not that simple. You have to do a lot of other things in order to have that happen. Like, you're never going to realize the benefit of 0% income tax until you get there, because you're going to lose out on those other guys. And then we also need to do things like occupational licensing reform. If our goal is to attract new people to our state, we have one of the highest burdens for occupational licensing in the entire nation. So, why would a podiatrist come here when they have to jump through a bunch of additional hoops to get licensed? Or, just any occupational license with that regard. So, we've got to really figure out, if we're pushing in this direction, and this is our economic policy, at least that we're saying publicly, our policy surrounding those things doesn't necessarily seem to align with that push. And so maybe the hodgepodge of throwing darts on the board and kind of building certain industries is say, well, when we get to zero, we'll attract the people in and we'll have the jobs to put them in. But that also doesn't seem to be playing out and on a large scale level around the state.
And the problem with saying, well, when we get to zero, we'll attract in people, it's, how many states have 0% income tax now?
More moving towards it.
Yeah, everybody's moving towards
maybe
it.
Alabama.
Mississippi went to zero, I believe. Tennessee's at zero, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is Texas at zero? I think Texas is at zero.
Texas is 0, Florida's at 0. But there have been a couple new that have passed legislation, at least this year, to make a solid and steady approach to zero.
Right. So you're not going to attract in anybody.
Right, you're going to lose them to the other places that are already on that steady march.
Or there. I mean, you're losing. I mean, Tennessee's. I would argue Kentucky's lost a lot of industry. Tennessee.
Yeah. Oh,
when you look at the last several years.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, Tennessee made that decision to go to zero. They did it the right way. They did it quickly, and I think if you compare us over the last 10 or 15 years, we're night and day, despite having significant geographical similarities, population similarities, cultural similarities. Tennessee seems to eat our lunch every time, and it's because of wise tax policy.
Well, and you think, too, we're even closer, though, to the Northeast. Like, as far as shipping it, we're a few hours closer.
Yeah, we're like an 18-hour drive or something from the entire East Coast.
Right. Well, thank you for coming in and talking to us for a little bit. We'll have to have you on again, okay?
Anytime.
All right. Thank you all so much. We'll see you back here next week.